Yeah.
Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert, bringing you some of the best college football news, predictions, and analysis. Make sure to like this video, go follow us on Twitter at Gridiron Expert, and make sure to check out our official website, thegridironexpert.com, where you can sign up for our weekly newsletter and also sign up for our expert picks. The links for all of these things are in the description below, so do not miss out on any of the extra college football content. Well, I can tell you right now that Week 10 is not going to be nearly as exciting as Week 9 or maybe even Week 7. But it still has its fair share of games that we have to keep our eyes on. Two big ranked versus ranked matchups, one that has major SEC title implications and college football playoff implications, the other having major American Athletic Conference implications and major New Year's Six bowl game implications. We also have another game up here that has major ACC coastal implications. The winner of North Carolina and Virginia might as well win the ACC Coastal Division. And then two major trap games for two top 10 teams. We've seen 3 straight weeks where a top 10 team has fallen to an unranked opponent. Will that fate be in store for Utah or Oregon as they travel to Washington in USC? So we're going to preview our top 5 biggest games going into Week 10 and then take a look at our Heisman watch as we enter the month of November, which of course, as we all know, is the biggest month in college football. It's the last chance for these top 10 teams, these top 15 teams, to make their impressions on the College Football Playoff Committee. It's the last chance for these teams to make a final run to try to win their conference. And of course, it's the month where anything can happen. Anything is possible. We've seen that through 9 weeks already. Expected to happen over the next 4 or 5 weeks as well. So let's kick things off with the world's largest outdoor cocktail party as number 8 Georgia faces off against number 6 Florida in Jacksonville. And as we mentioned, this is a game that has major SEC title implications. The winner of this game more than likely going to win the SEC East and have a date against either LSU or Alabama in the SEC title game. Of course, that monster matchup coming in Week 11, number 1 LSU taking on number 2 Alabama at Bryant-Denny Stadium. But as you can see, right now we are picking Florida to beat Georgia. And that is a change. We had Georgia winning in the preseason. We switched it over to Florida. And before I get a lot of hate from Georgia fans, which I'm sure I will get regardless of my analysis here, you have to hear me out. Georgia has won 2 straight over Florida. Yes, they have. But as of late, they have struggled. You go and look what happened against South Carolina a few weeks ago. Now, that's not the reason we're picking Florida here, but that's not a good loss for the Bulldogs. They fall to South Carolina, a team Florida was able to go beat by 11 at Williams-Brice Stadium in a very sloppy and rainy game. So they lost to South Carolina. They then played Kentucky the week after, and that was a game that many thought was going to be a major bounce-back game for Georgia. At home, at night, they're angry after that loss to South Carolina, and they only beat the Wildcats 21-0 with a wide receiver at quarterback for the Wildcats, and didn't score a touchdown until 6 minutes and 20 seconds remaining in the third quarter. The play calling has been very questionable for Georgia. Very questionable. Relying heavily on the run, and I don't blame them, as they have one of the better running backs in the SEC with DeAndre Swift. But they pounded the rock so much against Kentucky that Jake Fromm went 9 for 12 for just 35 yards. Yeah, they got the win, but the passing game and the offensive struggles is something to be of note going into a game against Florida that has one of the better defenses in the entire SEC. Florida's rushing defense allows just 124.1 rushing yards per game. Georgia as a team is averaging 236.9. A lot of those, of course, being taken up by DeAndre Swift. So can Florida's rushing defense shut down Georgia's run offense? Because I'm telling you, Jake Fromm is a great quarterback. Great quarterback for the Bulldogs. He's more than capable of winning this game through the air. But he hasn't shown it in the past 2 games as Georgia's offense has struggled. On the other side, with the Gators, they have been phenomenal across the board. They beat Auburn by 11 a few weeks ago. They hung with LSU until the final minute in Death Valley at night, losing by 14 points, probably a game they should have only lost by 7. And then they went on the road, as we mentioned, and beat South Carolina by 11. That team beat Georgia in Athens. Kyle Trask is playing extremely well. 4 touchdowns the last time we saw him. That, of course, coming against South Carolina. Their pass rush is dominant. They're forcing turnovers like crazy. And unless Georgia made some major changes in the bye week, I think Florida wins this game. They're underdogs. They're underdogs against the spread. They're underdogs in the FPI. But I like Dan Mullen and the Gators. They've shown me more this season. They've played better against elite opponents. Their defense is looking shut down, unstoppable, and I like the Gators to get a big win over Georgia and ruin the Bulldogs' SEC title hopes. Georgia fans, you're not going to like it. You'll call me a hater. Say what you want. Not the case. I just like the Gators down in Jacksonville. Next game up on the board, number 9 Utah traveling to Washington. A game that we mentioned could be a trap game for the Utes. Now, back in the preseason, we also picked Utah in this game. We're sticking with it. We're picking the Utes in this one as well. Utah lost the 2 meetings last season against the Huskies. They lost 21-7 at Rice-Eccles Stadium, and then, of course, they lost 10-3 in the Pac-12 title game. The lone touchdown coming on a wild pick 6 from Washington. But the difference maker in this game, guys, is Utah's defense. The Utes' defense has been absolutely outstanding. Since Utah lost to USC way back in September, they have outscored their opponents 136-23. Let that thing sink in. Over the past 4 games since that loss to USC, 136-23 for Utah. They're allowing just 231 yards per game, allowing just 10.3 points per game over the course of the entire season. And as we've mentioned before when we've talked about Utah, they boast one of the most balanced offenses in the entire country with Tyler Huntley at quarterback, who's also dual threat, and Zach Moss, one of the better and more underrated running backs in the entire country. Now for Washington, at home, you never want to doubt Chris Peterson. You never want to doubt a Chris Peterson-led team. You never want to doubt him at Boise State, and you certainly don't want to do it here at Washington. The FPI likes Washington barely. They're giving the Huskies a 52.9% chance to win this game. Their last biggest game that they had was against Oregon, which they lost 35-31 after leading by 14 in the second half. They're coming off a bye week. You know I love teams coming off bye weeks. Well rested, maybe not as beat up as the team that played before them, assuming they're not coming off a bye week. So that at home, coming off a bye, there are a lot of positives for Washington to win this game. But I expect this game to be low scoring. I expect Washington has to win this game through the air because Utah's rush defense is allowing just 56.4 rushing yards per game. Salvin Ahmed is not going to have a big game on the ground, which means Jacob Eason has to have a big game through the air. If Utah's defense is able to hone in on the pass, much like they've done against other teams this season, look what they did against Washington State. 38-13 victory for the Utes. If they're able to hone in on the pass, it'll be a long day for the Huskies. I expect a low-scoring game in Seattle, but Utah escapes with the win and keeps their college football playoff and Pac-12 title hopes alive. Moving down, our third biggest game of the week, where College Game Day is going. This one received a lot of hate as well. Last week they went to South Dakota State. This week they're going to Memphis. Number 15 SMU traveling to number 24 Memphis. First time ever they've traveled to face the Tigers. First time they've ever traveled to see the Tigers Game Day crew in person. This is a game that will determine the American Athletic Conference Western Division. So the stakes are already high enough. You throw Game Day on top of it, imagine the atmosphere that we're going to have down in Memphis on Saturday morning. Not only will this game decide who wins the American Athletic Western Division, it also may decide who gets into a New Year's Six bowl game. Because right now, SMU, one of the biggest surprises in all of college football this season, is the highest ranked Group of 5 team. And as we all know, the highest ranked Group of 5 conference champion makes a New Year's Six bowl game. SMU wins this, runs the table, wins the American Athletic, they are going to a New Year's Six bowl game. They've got to get past Memphis. And we don't think they will. Yes, they're one of the biggest surprises in year 2 under Sonny Dykes. They're 8-0. They beat TCU, who just beat Texas by 10. Phenomenal. That's the reason SMU got ranked, and since then they continue to roll. Their passing game has been out of this world. They bring in Shane Buechele, the transfer quarterback from Texas. He's averaging 301.4 passing yards per game. He's got 20 touchdowns. The SMU offense is averaging 43 points per game and over 500 yards per game. They've looked nearly unstoppable on the offensive side of the football. Defense, still a bit of cause of concern. A little bit of cause of concern. A little bit of inconsistencies there. Barely survived a beat-up Houston team just last week, winning 34-31 on the road. Allowed over 40 points in that thrilling game over Tulsa, triple overtime. So, a little bit inconsistent there, but the same can be said for Memphis. For the Tigers, Brady White has over 2,100 yards on the year, 20 touchdowns, and just 4 interceptions. Memphis, like SMU, is averaging nearly 40 points per game, 39.5 for the Tigers. So you can expect this game to be high scoring. Two teams that have decent but not elite defenses, but do have elite offenses. Expect some points to be scored in this one. The lone loss for Memphis was by 2 points to a solid Temple team that has a very stout defense, and yet the Tigers still scored 28 on them. But like we mentioned with SMU, they're still inconsistent defensively. They allowed a lot of points just a couple weeks ago, or just last week, to Tulsa. Allowed a lot of points to Temple. So what defense is going to show up for SMU? What defense is going to show up for Memphis? In this game, I think Memphis owns the slight edge defensively, and this is one of those games that I think plays a major role with home field advantage. Memphis has it. With the American Athletic Western Division on the line, with College Game Day in town, I like Memphis to upset SMU and throw chaos into who gets that New Year's Six bowl berth out of the group of 5. Because second in line is Cincinnati, who still has to play Memphis in the season finale. Appalachian State's still in the hunt. Boise State's still in the hunt. Who's going to get that spot if Memphis pulls off the upset? We think they do, and it's going to be a really tight race for the remainder of the season. Fourth game we have up on the board, Virginia at North Carolina. We mentioned it earlier, we'll say it again. Like Memphis and SMU, that will determine the West. This game should determine the ACC Coastal, as both of these teams are sitting at first place in that division with a 3-2 record. So the winner of this gets some separation. They have a 1-game lead over the other and own the tiebreaker if it comes down to that. Virginia was the heavy favorite back in the preseason. Everybody thought Virginia was a lock to win the Coastal because it was so weak. No one expected North Carolina to be in contention this year. Miami, we didn't know what to expect out of Manny Diaz. Everybody else, not that great. Duke, Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech, not really. But here we are with Virginia and North Carolina, the winner more than likely going to face off against Clemson. Virginia lost to Notre Dame, Miami, and Louisville this season, so already 3 losses in a year that many thought they'd go 9-3 or 10-2. They really can't afford a loss here. Bryce Perkins has really disappointed me. A guy that I thought would have a breakout year in 2019 only has a little over 1,800 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions this season. He has added 5 rushing touchdowns, but not nearly as good as I thought he'd be at this point in the season. While Virginia, I do believe, owns a defensive edge in this game, will they be able to shut down Sam Howell and this passing attack that Matt Brown has just rejuvenated at Chapel Hill? I mean, goodness, ladies and gentlemen, what Matt Brown has done in his first year back, not just at North Carolina, but first year back in coaching period, has been unbelievable. The Tar Heels are 4-4, obviously in contention for a ACC title berth, and keep in mind, those 4 losses came by a combined 12 points. A somewhat controversial ending to Wake Forest, losing by 6 to the Demon Deacons. Lost by 3 to Appalachian State. Not the best loss, but the Mountaineers are looking pretty good. 1 point, just 1, to Clemson. And then by 2 points in 6 overtimes to Virginia Tech. Just last week, they won their rivalry game by 3 points over Duke. And Sam Howell, as we mentioned, has over 2,100 yards, 22 touchdowns, and just 5 interceptions as a freshman quarterback with Matt Brown. The Tar Heels are looking extremely, extremely good. They're averaging 268 passing yards per game. Home field advantage plays a huge role in this one. The passing game against a mediocre pass defense in Virginia plays a big one. I think the defense does enough to shut down Bryce Perkins, and Matt Brown and the Tar Heels beat the Cavaliers. Sole possession of first place in the ACC Coastal. If they run the table the rest of the way, they will set up a rematch against Clemson, and it could be a close one, guys. It's a 1-point game last time they played. Could be close again in the title game, but watch out for this game. I know it's not a ranked versus ranked opponent or ranked versus ranked matchup, not even having a ranked team, but this one is a big one on Saturday night. And then finally, we have number 7 Oregon traveling to USC. Like Utah and Washington, we feel this as a potential trap game, not just for another top 10 team against an unranked opponent, but a trap game for an elite Pac-12 team. And the Pac-12 has any chance of making the college football playoff, Oregon or Utah or both has to win on Saturday. They cannot afford to trip up on the road in these trap games against quality opponents. Now, Oregon has been prone to choke in moments like these before. You know, they've fallen to Arizona many years ago. They've fallen to USC in times like this. Oregon can't let getting into the top 10 go to their head, and I don't think it will. Justin Herbert is still playing like one of the better quarterbacks in the country, over 2,100 yards, 21 touchdowns, and just 1 interception. But the guy that no one's talking about for the Ducks is C.J. Verdell. Everybody talks about the passing attack that Oregon brings to the table, but just last week against Washington State, C.J. Verdell had 23 carries for 257 yards. Yes, that's a real stat line. He averaged 11.2 yards per carry against Mike Leach and the Cougars. 3 touchdowns, pretty much single-handedly won that game for Oregon as they escaped Washington State 37-35 on a game-winning field goal. Since that Auburn matchup, I should add, Oregon's defense has cracked down significantly. Yes, they allowed a handful of points to Washington and Washington State, but both of those have elite offenses. While USC has a potent passing attack led by Graham Harrell and the air raid offense, I think the Oregon secondary really cracks down in this one. The biggest storyline and the only way that USC get to win here is not only having home field advantage, but it's their wide receivers, USC's wide receivers, all of which are NFL caliber, going up against Oregon's cornerbacks and Oregon's secondary. Can the Ducks shut them down or at least prevent yards after the catch? And if they do, I think they get a win. I do believe that happens. I think Oregon's defense steps up. They're only allowing 14.8 points per game this season. The passing defense has stepped up big time, like I said, since that Auburn loss. They really didn't get torched against the pass in that game, led by Bo Nix. But I like USC, a team that's allowing over 240 yards on the ground or against the pass and over 180 yards on the ground defensively, to fall to the Ducks, and the Ducks keep their Pac-12 title hopes and college football playoff hopes alive as well. But once again, Utah and Oregon cannot overlook these 2 games, potential trap games, and in all honesty, I would not be surprised to see one of these 2 top 10 teams fall to make it 4 straight weeks that we see a top 10 team fall to an unranked opponent. So those are your top 5 games, and that's who we have winning them. 2 of those are prediction changes. We switched the Florida-Georgia game, and we switched to North Carolina beating Virginia. Obviously a team that surprised many this season. So keep an eye on these 5 games. Not nearly as exciting as last week, not nearly as exciting as Week 7, and nowhere near as exciting as what a Week 11 is going to be. But still one that you have to watch out for. Still a week that has major implications across the board. Take a look at our Heisman watch real quick. It is no surprise that our front runner is, in fact, Joe Burrow. The LSU quarterback is setting records left and right, has over 2,800 yards this season, 30 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. He takes extremely good care of the football. Just last week against a solid Auburn defense, he had 321 yards and a touchdown, led them to a 23-20 victory over Auburn, which basically ruined Auburn's college football playoff and SEC title hopes. The Tigers have a bye week this week before setting up the game of the century part 2, as number 1, the newly ranked number 1 LSU Tigers travel to number 2 Alabama on November 9th. And of course, I would assume those rankings will stay the same when the playoff rankings are released on Tuesday, but nonetheless, it's still going to be a huge matchup, not just for the SEC West, but for the college football playoff. And if Joe Burrow has a huge game against Alabama on the road against a solid defense, you might as well just hand him the Heisman. Right below him, we have Jalen Hurts, the quarterback for Oklahoma, that despite the loss to Kansas State last week, still put up 395 passing yards, 96 rushing yards, and 4 total touchdowns, 3 of those coming on the ground. Over the course of this season, he has 34 total touchdowns and over 3,200 all-purpose yards. The guy's nearly unstoppable, guys. Even, it wasn't Jalen Hurts' fault, in my opinion, that Oklahoma fell. It was their defense. Oklahoma's defense just could not get a stop. Could not get a stop. And that was their downfall to Kansas State. But nonetheless, Jalen Hurts putting up some monster numbers. It's really, in my opinion, a two-man race right now between Joe Burrow, who I'm giving the slight edge over Jalen Hurts, but he's right behind him. Very similar to the race we had last year between Tua Tagovailoa and Kyler Murray. But right now, Jalen Hurts right behind him at number 2. He also has a bye week before facing off against Iowa State. And the Sooners, despite the loss, still in the hunt for the college football playoff. We've got one of his rivals over there at Oklahoma State, Chuba Hubbard. The name that no one is still not giving enough credit, this name that no one is still not talking about enough. The Oklahoma State running back has rushed for over 1,300 yards, 1,381 yards, 16 touchdowns, averaging 6.4 yards per carry. Last week against Iowa State, he had 116 yards, and the Cowboys ended up upsetting the Cyclones on the road. He's got a tough test next week against TCU, a team that's allowing us 103.7 rushing yards per game. So keep an eye on Chuba Hubbard, guys. Do I think he's going to win the Heisman? Unfortunately, no. A guy like Jalen Hurts or Joe Burrow will. But the monster numbers that he's putting up at Oklahoma State, he is the main reason the Oklahoma State and their offense is thriving this season. Give him credit for what he is doing. The leading rusher for the entire FBS. And then finally, you'll see we've got 3 names up on the board. We're kind of doing a cop-out here. We couldn't just pick one. We have to address everything that's happening at Ohio State. Arguably the best team in the country, Justin Fields, J.K. Dobbins, and Chase Young. We'll get to him in a second, but Justin Fields has over 1,600 yards through the air, 24 touchdowns, just 1 interception. He also has 9 rushing yards as well. Ohio State's on a bye week this week as well, so some of the top teams in the country on a bye in Week 10. But Fields putting up some monster numbers, has that ability, that dual threat ability, something that Joe Burrow doesn't have as much of. We've seen him scramble some, but Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts certainly on the edge when it comes to scrambling and making plays with their feet. Something that could give them an extra edge over Burrow if needed. J.K. Dobbins over 1,100 yards this season, 9 touchdowns, averaging 7.2 yards per carry. Against Wisconsin and that elite defense, 163 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns, 8.2 yards per carry. You can't make that stuff up, guys. You cannot make it up. Going up against an elite defense like that, you torch them. Conversely, look at what Jonathan Taylor did. You'll notice he's not up here. No, one game does not make or break your Heisman chances. Unfortunately for the voters, it does. But in my opinion, it doesn't. But we took him off just for now because against that Ohio State team, he was held to just barely 50 yards and no touchdowns. I get Wisconsin could not get much offense going. I get it. But it's not acceptable, guys. You have to show up against the elite teams. If you can't put the good numbers up against elite teams, in my opinion, you do not earn the Heisman. J.K. Dobbins was able to do it. Jonathan Taylor was not able to. Dobbins putting up monster numbers. Can he continue it over the rest of the season? And then finally, Chase Young. Many who are considering the best player in college football. And if you were supposed to give the Heisman to the best player in all of college football, then maybe you should give it to Chase Young. But he's probably not going to get it because he is a defensive player. But he's putting up insane numbers. 29 tackles this season, 22 of those solo. 13.5 sacks, over 15 tackles for losses, and 5 forced fumbles, including a monster game this past week against Wisconsin. Chase Young, I do believe, is the best player in college football, will no doubt be a top 5 draft pick in next year's NFL draft, if not the number 1 overall draft pick. That's why we have him on our Heisman watch right now, because he is playing out of his mind for one of the best defenses in the entire country in the Ohio State Buckeyes. So we've got a trio here from Ohio State, all worthy of being up on the board, but of course we had to address the other 3 as well. The Heisman race is just now heating up in the month of November, and so are these conference races and college football playoff races, none of which you want to miss, none of these games that you want to miss as we enter Week 10 and as we near the end of college football season. It's just going to keep getting better and better, more exciting, and as we've already seen through 9 weeks, even more and more unpredictable. So guys, thank you for watching us here on YouTube. Go check us out on Twitter at Gridiron Expert, and check out our official website, thegridironexpert.com. Sign up for the newsletter and sign up for the expert picks. And as always, thank you for watching. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you next time on the Gridiron Expert.